It was a crisp Monday morning in downtown Chicago, and the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. Cars honking, people rushing, and skyscrapers bathing in sunlight. In the heart of it all stood Alexander Reed, a 47-year-old millionaire entrepreneur who had built his tech empire from scratch. Sharp suit, expensive watch, and a gaze that could freeze a room. Alexander had money, power, and very little patience. Don't forget to support the channel with your like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Having you here is always special. Inside the towering glass building of Reed Tech Inc., employees whispered his name with a mix of admiration and fear. He wasn't cruel, just cold. Results mattered more than feelings. For Alexander, emotions were luxuries for the weak. That morning, Alexander stepped out of his private elevator, only to find an elderly janitor mopping the lobby floor, accidentally blocking his path. The man was slow, clearly tired, and unaware of who was approaching. His name was Harold Dawson, 68 years old, with a hunched back and years of labor etched into every wrinkle on his face. Without a moment's hesitation, Alexander shouted, "Do you even look where you're going? This is a company, not a nursing home." The entire lobby fell silent. Harold slowly looked up, shocked and humiliated, but instead of replying, he simply nodded, whispered, "Sorry, sir," and continued cleaning, his hands trembling. No one defended Harold. No one dared. The moment passed, but a quiet tension hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. That night, Alexander slept like it was any other day, unaware that tomorrow would flip his entire world upside down. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Reed Tech Inc. at his usual time, 7:45 a.m. sharp. As he walked through the automatic glass doors, he noticed something odd. The security guard didn't greet him with the usual, "Good morning, Mr. Reed." In fact, the guard looked away. When Alexander stepped into the lobby, he noticed more strange things. No one rushed to greet him. The front desk assistant barely acknowledged his presence. His executive assistant, Julia, seemed distant. Shrugging it off as early morning sluggishness, Alexander headed to the elevator, but his keycard didn't work. Confused and slightly annoyed, he turned to Julia. "Is there an issue with the system? My card's not scanning." Julia hesitated, her voice soft. "I think you should head to the 28th floor. There's a meeting." Still confused, Alexander took the public elevator and made his way to the executive boardroom. There, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Sitting at the head of the table, wearing a tailored grey suit and flanked by several board members, was Harold Dawson, the janitor from the day before. Alexander blinked, assuming it was some cruel joke. "Harold," he muttered. But Harold didn't flinch. He smiled politely and stood. "Mr. Reed, please, take a seat." One of the board members, a woman named Vanessa Hill, spoke up. "Alexander, we should have informed you yesterday. The ownership of Reed Tech has changed." Alexander's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa handed over a document. It was signed, notarized, and legal. The company had been acquired by a silent partner weeks ago. That partner was Harold Dawson. Harold calmly explained, "I retired 20 years ago after selling my shares in a software company you might remember, Metro Logic. I've been living modestly under the radar, watching the industry I helped build. I recently decided to re-enter the business world. Reed Tech was the right fit." Alexander stared at him, stunned. "You were pretending to be a janitor." Harold nodded. "I wasn't pretending. I wanted to see what kind of people I'd be working with, especially the leadership." The room was silent. Harold continued. "And yesterday I got my answer. You humiliated someone in front of an entire room for doing his job. That's not leadership, that's cruelty." Then came the final blow. "You're being let go, Mr. Reed, effective immediately. Your severance package is included in the envelope." Alexander's jaw clenched. "You can't do this." Harold looked at him, not with anger, but with deep disappointment. "I just did." The boardroom emptied slowly. Whispers followed Alexander as he stood there paralyzed, once the king of the company, now ousted by a man he had dismissed as invisible. Outside the building, the morning had turned grey. Clouds hung low, and the breeze carried the weight of Alexander's thoughts. He walked aimlessly, still in his expensive suit, feeling like a ghost in his own city. Nobody recognized him anymore, and for the first time in years, he felt what it meant to be unseen. That evening, Alexander sat alone in a quiet bar, not far from his old office. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, the mop, the shout, Harold's calm voice, and the stunned faces of his former employees. He ordered a drink, then another. But nothing dulled the guilt that was crawling through his chest. He had spent years building an empire, but not a single soul had fought for him when he fell. That hurt more than the firing. Then something unexpected happened. The bartender placed a small napkin in front of him with a note scribbled in blue ink. "The way you treat those below you reveals more about your soul than your success ever will." Alexander looked around, but no one claimed the message. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. The words hit harder than any firing ever could. That night he returned to his empty penthouse, surrounded by luxury yet feeling more worthless than ever. He stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Then something inside him cracked open. He sat down and wrote a letter, not to the board, not to Harold, but to himself. A confession, a promise, a start. Over the following weeks, Alexander Reed disappeared from the business headlines. No interviews, no statements. He had vanished from the tech world, but not from life. Instead of chasing another company to take over, he began waking up early and walking through the city. For the first time in years, he paid attention to people, to small things, to kindness. He volunteered at a local shelter, quietly. No cameras, no press. Just a man trying to reconnect with the world he had ignored. He mopped floors, served soup, listened. There he met Clara, a retired teacher who spent her mornings helping children learn to read. "Everyone has something to give back," she told him. That stuck with Alexander. He started reading to the kids too, at first awkwardly, then with purpose. He didn't tell anyone about who he was, not until a boy named Jordan recognized him from an old magazine cover. "Aren't you the guy with the apps and jets?" Alexander smiled softly. "I used to be." "So what happened?" He paused, then replied, "I forgot what people were for." The shelter soon became his daily sanctuary. The people there didn't care about his past. They only saw the man he was trying to become. But still, one thing haunted him: Harold Dawson. He wanted to face him, not to argue, not to fight, but to apologize, truly. One cold morning, Alexander returned to Reed Tech's lobby. He was no longer the boss, no longer feared, just a man with a letter in his hand. Harold saw him before the security did. He stepped forward. Alexander took a breath. "I came to say thank you." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Thank me. You showed me who I really was, and that was the most painful and most important day of my life." He handed Harold the letter. A handwritten apology, filled with remorse, reflection, and genuine gratitude. Harold read it quietly, then looked up. "People don't change with power, Alexander. They change when they lose it and decide to rebuild something better." They shook hands. No bitterness, no pride, just two men, one who had fallen and one who had lifted him without saying a word. Weeks later, Reed Tech held a major public event, the company's annual Innovation Summit. Unlike previous years, it was no longer hosted in a luxury hotel or streamed from a penthouse suite. Instead, it was held in a renovated community center downtown, a place Harold insisted on supporting as part of Reed Tech's new mission. Alexander received a formal invitation. He hesitated at first, unsure if he belonged, but something in him said, "You need to go." When he arrived, the scene was unlike anything he remembered. Gone were the velvet ropes, VIP lounges, and media flashes. Instead, the room was filled with young entrepreneurs, community leaders, educators, and people from all walks of life. On stage stood Harold Dawson, but this time, beside him, was a surprise. "I'd like to introduce someone many of you know for his past, but today, I want you to meet him for who he is now." Harold turned to Alexander, and motioned him forward. There was a brief silence, then scattered applause, and slowly it grew. Alexander stepped up to the microphone, nervous, raw, no longer polished by rehearsed speeches and PR teams. A year ago, I stood on a stage like this, believing I was untouchable. That success meant power. That I mattered more than the people who cleaned my floors or served my coffee. I was wrong. The crowd was silent, listening. I screamed at a man I didn't even try to understand. I lost everything and found something better. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. Humility, gratitude, and the chance to do more than just build companies, the chance to build people. When he stepped off the stage, dozens of young attendees approached him, not for autographs, but for advice, conversation, connection. Alexander spent hours speaking with them, not as a millionaire, but as a man who had fallen and gotten back up. That day became known as a turning point, not only for ReedTech, but for Alexander himself. His redemption was no longer private, it was a beacon. In the months that followed the summit, Alexander Reed quietly became one of the most sought-after mentors in the tech and business world. Not because of his success, but because of his failure, and more importantly, how he chose to rise from it. He didn't rebuild a tech empire. He didn't launch a new product. Instead, he partnered with Harold and a small group of socially driven entrepreneurs to launch the Human First Initiative, a foundation focused on leadership training, ethical business practices, and character development for young professionals from underrepresented communities. Every Wednesday, Alexander returned to the shelter where he once served soup and read books to kids. He never missed a week. One day, a young janitor at a co-working space spilled coffee by accident in front of him. Flushed with embarrassment, the boy muttered, "I'm so sorry, sir." Alexander smiled and bent down to help clean it. "It's just coffee," he said, handing the boy a napkin. "Happens to the best of us." That small moment, unnoticed by most, symbolized the full circle of Alexander's journey. Back at ReedTech, Harold remained a humble and steady leader. And though he never spoke publicly about the incident that shook the company, people knew. And that silent accountability reshaped the company culture entirely. Employees began treating each other differently, not out of fear, but out of example. Harold once said in a team meeting, "You never really know who's watching or what someone might grow into." And those words stayed long after he left the room. 2 years later, a book titled "The Day I Was Fired by a Janitor" hit the shelves. Its author, Alexander Reed. But it wasn't a memoir of wealth, innovation, or boardroom strategies. It was a raw, honest account of ego, failure, humility, and transformation. The book became a quiet bestseller, not because it told people how to succeed, but because it reminded them how to be human. In the final chapter, Alexander wrote, "I once believed being on top made me untouchable, but the higher you climb without empathy, the harder your fall. I thank God I fell, because that's where I learned to stand." Meanwhile, Harold Dawson retired for real this time, moving to a small house by the lake in Michigan where he gardened, read books, and occasionally gave quiet talks at local schools about leadership and kindness. He never once mentioned Alexander's name. He didn't need to. Back in Chicago, ReedTech became a company known for something far greater than its products, its people. The culture Harold built and the lesson Alexander lived shaped a generation of young minds who no longer measured success in stock prices, but in character, courage, and compassion. And somewhere in the heart of the city, on a quiet bench outside a public park, Alexander often sat alone at dusk. No bodyguards, no phone, just a notepad in his hand, reflecting on a single, ordinary moment that had changed his life. A mop, a hallway, and a man who refused to scream back. We've shared another story full of emotion. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and come experience more unforgettable moments with us. God bless you.